Good morning and welcome to Carolina Cares, an iHeart Media production. My name is Tyler Ryan, your host, and I want to talk this morning about a couple of numbers that should actually make you stand up and just take a second. Over one half of people that are 85 years and older, and we all know somebody who's over 85, over one half of people 85 years and older suffer from Alzheimer's. Over half. How about that? 16 million Americans are caregivers. We talk about Alzheimer's. We see the ads that somewhere out there, the first Alzheimer's survivor is there, and they are somewhere. But what about the 16 million caregivers as well? Oftentimes you don't think about that. You think about the people, your loved ones, your friends. You hear about that suffer from Alzheimer's, but those caregivers give so much. It's a full-time job to the point where people lose homes, where they lose careers, lose jobs, lose savings, all to take care of that loved one. The Alzheimer's Association has a very sacred task, and that task is research, care, education, and of course, the main mission is finding that first Alzheimer's survivor. Joining me from the Alzheimer's Association here in South Carolina, Ms. Taylor Wilson, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So let's talk a little bit about Alzheimer's. I think that it's safe to say that with the amount of people who suffer from Alzheimer's, the amount of caregivers that there are, very few people have not been touched or unaware of what Alzheimer's is. If you're one of those small amounts, maybe you haven't had a family interaction, people know what it is. The Notebook, that's an exact perfect personification of Alzheimer's, right?
Right. So I was talking to a coworker the other day, and I said, I'm not sure if this is kind of like if you think about a yellow car, you see yellow cars or not, but every Netflix show I've binged recently has either had an Alzheimer's arc or an Alzheimer's episode. We're seeing it show up more in pop culture, and I think it's because of the numbers that are affected. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago when I started at the Alzheimer's Association, we were right at 5 million Americans who were affected. Now we're at 5.8 million Americans that are affected.
So another 800,000 in the last couple of years.
Well, and what you're looking at there is we went from every 68 seconds someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, every 65 seconds somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So looking at those numbers and watching the trend lines increase and knowing that we have no way to treat this, slow it down, there's no prevention that we can identify right now in research. It's one of those things where we know it's only going to grow in prevalence. So you're talking about people who right now may have had a friend of a friend whose mom had Alzheimer's. That's going to come down to my mom has Alzheimer's, or my mother-in-law has Alzheimer's, my father-in-law. So those numbers are projected to increase. In South Carolina alone, when I started, we had 82,000 people who had Alzheimer's. Now we're at 92,000. Again, I've only been here 4 years. Right. And you're talking about, we're a retirement state. We have beautiful beaches. And I think that that's part of it is that, because we have an aging population, we're going to see that growth here as well, which is why it's really important for us to all come together to address this. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. We always talk about how daunting this disease seems, and it is. It's overwhelming when you look at the numbers. But we also have hope. We know that our first survivor is out there, and that's what our entire A Walk to End Alzheimer's is all about, specifically about finding our first survivor. So across the nation, there are thousands of walks that happen, and we get a lot of really great people together, all in their purple, and we raise money to try and address care and support for families who are facing this disease in our communities, but also research. 40% of all funds raised in A Walk to End Alzheimer's across the nation go to research grants to try and find that cure, that treatment. So if you want to be a part of A Walk to End Alzheimer's, there are 9 in this state. I guarantee you there's one near you. We're not that big of a state. And you can go to alz.org/SC/walk. And there you will find all of them. And they start in mid-September and go to the first part of November. So if one weekend doesn't work for you and you're willing to travel a little bit further, right, there's one that's going to happen on that weekend. We've got them in Bluffton. We've got them in Myrtle Beach. But then we also have one in Anderson and one in Rock Hill. I mean, we pretty much cover the state. We have the one that's in Columbia is coming up on the 26th of October. So that's something that we're really excited about. But again, visit alz.org/SC/walk and find out about the different types of walks that are going around.
Sure.
You can also find out about volunteering if you're not really interested in walking. I always tell people this, sometimes it's really nice to be active, but sometimes you may not be able to walk a full mile or mile and a half.
Absolutely.
If you want to be a cheerleader, you can volunteer with us. We'll give you a cowbell and a lot of noisemakers, and you can cheer on the people who are there. The big thing about it is coming together and supporting one another, knowing, number one, that you're not alone. That's a big thing. And then number two, that we can make change happen. We can figure this out. And we're really excited about what 2019 is going to bring. It's going to be the biggest walk year yet. We're expecting to cross $1 million in fundraising in some of our walks just here in South Carolina, which I know doesn't sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but you're talking about we're on par with places like Atlanta and Chicago now in South Carolina in terms of fundraising.
That's fantastic.
Which is huge.
That's what it takes, is that dollar. And I guess the scary thing, and I do want to get into what Alzheimer's is, how it really impacts, but it's still, I can't wrap my brain around the fact that we can't do anything about it. That's the thing. I'm like, how do we all this information, this technology, all these things we can do medically, we can basically create a human being, a clone with a goat, but we can't figure out how to stop, how to treat, how to reverse Alzheimer's. I just don't get it.
The brain is so complex, and I think that's the first thing. The second thing is there is a lot of types of dementia. So we talk about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, but it is not dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term. Dementia can be caused by traumatic brain injury. It can be caused by stroke. It can be caused by frontal temporal lobe damage. There's a dementia that's caused by Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of variables that go into science, right?
Sure.
And then it's been underfunded for years. For a long time, nobody even looked at it and said, this is a disease. It was old-timers. It wasn't Alzheimer's. So we are just now starting to focus on this in research and really make some headway. The last 9 to 10 years have been huge. National Institutes of Health has been funding it, funding really great research grants. The Alzheimer's Association, again, 40% of all of our fundraising goes to research grants. We are the third largest funder of Alzheimer's research in the world. We come in,
but yet we still can't find a cause. We can't find a cure.
Right. So
world.
Imagine how complex this is for everyone involved. But this is why it's important to hold on to hope, because years ago we didn't know about the APOE4 gene, which is actually a genetic indicator of the risk that you might have Alzheimer's. We didn't know about early detection for Alzheimer's, like blood tests or imaging. Mm-hmm. The thing about it is that we know that we cannot reverse brain damage. The brain is something that it can heal itself, but once a brain is damaged in certain areas, it's going to take the brain rewiring itself. It's not going to regrow. It's not like your liver.
Okay.
But if we catch it early enough, before it's symptomatic, before dementia has shrank your brain. Ooh, I always get in trouble with this. Shrank your brain, maybe. Before that's happened, you're able to stop more damage from occurring. So now early diagnosis is a thing. Those are huge components of this. So while it may not seem like, because we don't have the big cure, we don't have our first survivor, because it still is 100% fatal, we have made such strides in the last 10 years to be able to say, this is the PET imaging scan that can show us that this person definitively has Alzheimer's. This is the blood test that shows us where the proteins are coming from. This is we know that for sure a healthy, active lifestyle and low blood pressure in your mid to later years is a huge determining factor about whether or not you're at a higher risk. So now we've gone through and identified all the risk factors. Now we've got to work on all the clinical trials, and eventually we will get to where this is. But if we start thinking about this in terms of all other, what we call the top 10 most deadly diseases,
right? You're
talking about cancer, heart disease, things like that. It took us years to find out that chemo and radiation could affect the cells of a tumor. We're just a little bit behind.
Sure.
And so, but we're optimistic. We're going to find our first survivor. Is it going to be the first survivor for my grandmother? No, she won't be the first survivor. But will one of my second or third cousins be the first survivor? Potentially. And so that's why we're optimistic. And that's why coming together for Walk to End Alzheimer's is so important. If you can't make it to a walk, though, we do have online forums where you can talk to other people who are affected that I really highly recommend. You can go to alz.org/SC and look for resources. Not only will you find resources there that specifically talk about online, but there are support groups in all 46 counties. Support groups where you can go meet with people who are caregivers or family members of someone who has dementia. And it's led by somebody who's trained, who can help you kind of walk through some of the difficulties you're having.
Right.
And you can find support. So I say that to say, start with Walk to End Alzheimer's. If you can't make it, you're still going to be able to find people who can help you. You can still be a part of this community. And there are so many resources on that website. There's an online training center that can talk to you about having difficult conversations. And boy, oh boy, is that important, because the first time you tell somebody you're about to take away their car keys,
it's not going to go well.
Oh, it doesn't go well. The first time you tell somebody, I think you're having memory issues, you should go see a doctor.
Can we talk about that just a little bit? Because, I forget things every now and again, and it scares me. I mean, my grandfather just passed with Alzheimer's, about a 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. And that's the most devastating, your grandmother as well, the most devastating thing to watch somebody slowly deteriorate to the point where, when Pop died, he wasn't Pop anymore. Mm-hmm. Every now and again you see a light, a little glimmer, but he wasn't Pop anymore. He looked like Pop, sounded like him, walked like him, but he's gone. But what, so I've watched that deterioration, but it starts with forgetting things. So, of course, it's in my family, so it scares the heck out of me when I'm like, what is that fella's name? I can't remember that fella's name. At what point does it cross from forgetfulness, these things, to Alzheimer's? So you say, sir, this is the diagnosis.
The when do we need to talk about going to see the doctor
Correct.
moment. Yeah. So we call that the aha, we need to go see a doctor moment. I can tell you that I myself, the other day, spent about 3 minutes looking for my cell phone while I was on a conference call on my cell phone. That's
I know it's funny, but we all
right?
do that, right?
But immediately I had the panic, right? Because this is in my family too. And I was like, oh, goodness gracious, is this my aha moment? And then I had to sit down and go, hang on a second. But I was also on a conference call, sending emails, trying to finish up some paperwork. Right. I was printing things. I was spread kind of thin that day. Plus, I knew I had to go and get meds for my dog, and I had to think about what I was going to cook for dinner. And
we actually do. Everybody does that, right? We're all texting and walking and talking, and yeah, you're right.
So we're stretched so thin, and the people always talk about multitasking. The brain cannot multitask. The brain can just very quickly go between thoughts. Okay, so imagine you have a computer that's 18 tabs open.
Right.
Your brain can shift between all of those tabs so quickly that you think you're thinking about all of the things at the same time. You're not. Your brain can only focus on one thing at a time. But because it is such a perfect computer, it's seamless and quick. So when you have 18 tabs open in your computer, how fast are those pages loading? Not as fast as if you had one tab open.
Because I know my computer's slow, and the engineering guy will go, dude, you've got 27 things open.
Yeah.
All right. No, we do. You're right.
Yeah. So when you're looking at that, that's how you have to think about those moments where you have forgetfulness.
Right.
The aha moment is when you see significant change. This is not just memory loss. This is personality shifts. If you've got someone who's never said a bad word in their lives, and all of a sudden they are cussing constantly, like to the point where you're like, whew, okay, that was maybe a little inappropriate for dropping something on the floor.
Sure.
I might have said it, but you've never said it.
Right.
That's when you may want to start paying attention. If you notice that someone is hesitant to step over a door jamb, or if you notice they're avoiding darker tiles in a store, that is a spatial reasoning issue. That may be them not sure if that's a hole or if that's a floor. You're talking about if someone comes to you and they haven't put on their shoes for a couple of days and you go, we need to put on shoes to go to the store, and they'd rather not go to the store and they get angry about it, it may be because they don't know how to use their shoes anymore. When you start to see significant changes, like I know that this is something that I use to clean my mouth, but I don't know what it's called and I don't know how to use it, and they're holding a toothbrush,
right? That's
cognitive decline. If it is, I'm afraid to take a step down off of this porch because that's dark dirt, and to me it looks like a hole, so I'd rather be combative and go back inside than come outside with you. That's an aha moment. If it's, I've been driving the same route to work for 60 years, and all of a sudden you get a call and they go, I don't know where I am, and they're 3 streets up. They should very easily have been able to turn around and come home. That's a moment for you to start worrying. It's not forgetting your keys. It's not talking on the cell phone while looking for the cell phone. It's more complex than that. It's things that start to affect activities of daily living. When you first notice those, and they may come and go very, very quickly, it may be months before you have another issue where, like I had one where my grandmother didn't call any of us by name one day. And I was like, that's interesting. She would just say, you, come here. You named all of us. There's 35. I get it. That's a lot. But you named all of us. You were the matriarch. I don't think anybody named their child anything without your explicit approval. And my name, you added your own last name into it. Like, let's be real clear, Mama. But when she wouldn't call any of us by name, I thought, that's a little bit weird. And then like 3 days later, we went back to the house and she knew everybody's name and was, calling everybody down and telling everybody, stop touching that, Ralph, don't do that, Mike, whatever. All of a sudden you realize maybe she didn't know our names that day. Got to keep an eye on that. The earlier you can get that person into a doctor, the better off your entire family is going to be. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can detail out.
Sure. Talking with Taylor Wilson from the Alzheimer's Association here in South Carolina. Walks happening starting most anytime all the way for the next couple of months to get involved with the Alzheimer's Association. To trying to understand and very interesting conversation just about that moment, because that's that part. That's where you've got to be self-aware, whether you're aware of, of your family member or you're aware of yourself. I mean, you could self-diagnose, right? I mean, you can have that moment. Is it possible to have your own aha moment where I say, this is weird. Today I can't remember my 35 kids. I mean, does that happen?
Yes. And I think that there's 2 ways that you respond to that, right? The first is, I need to go see a doctor because something's wrong. And the second is, I'm terrified to hear that I have this because I've seen all of my friends have to deal with it.
Right.
And I don't want my family to have to deal with it. So there's denial and there's fear. I think that when you have that opportunity with your own aha moment, it's good to talk to your physician first, even before you bring it up to your family. All primary care providers know how to do a wellness check every year, and it's actually covered by Medicare. There is a Medicare wellness check that you are eligible for after the age of 65 to get every year completely paid. And part of that wellness check is a cognition check.
How do they do that? I mean,
so if I give you 4 animals to remember,
okay,
cat, dog, fish, duck,
okay,
I'll wait 5 minutes. I'll examine you,
right,
and then I'll ask you to tell me those animals again.
But see, it goes back to that whole 18 tabs open though, because you just told me that, and I think I'm okay. But I'm not sure I'm going to remember all that in about 10 minutes. We've got 15 minutes left on the show. I may not remember the last thing.
But see, it wouldn't be 10 minutes.
Cat, dog, fish, duck.
It would be like 2.
Okay.
So, all right, cat, dog, fish, duck. All right, Mr. Ryan. So have you been on any other medications? Have you had any sort of other health issues? Have you experienced any sort of falls recently? What were the 4 animals that I asked you? That I just told you.
Cat, dog, fish, duck.
There we go. Somebody who may be experiencing cognitive decline may not be able to do that.
Wow.
So, again, If you're having doubts, if you have your own aha moment, next time you go to your primary care provider, tell them you want your annual wellness visit, which is covered by Medicare, and they will be able to provide it. And tell them, I'm having concerns about my memory. I'm having concerns about how I'm thinking about things. If you do that, primary care physicians have an opportunity to, there's a toolkit available through Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. They have tools available at their disposal, including the clock test, which a lot of people have heard about when we're talking about cognitive decline. All of those things are there, but you really have to be your own advocate if you're concerned about stuff like that. And I think that that's what's most important when you have that aha moment. If it's yours and about your own health, be your own advocate. If it's about somebody you love, be very considerate and kind when breaching that conversation. And the Alzheimer's Association, alz.org/SC, has an online training about how to have that hard conversation, because it's not easy. It's not easy to look at your loved one and be like, hey, you slipping. Like that's never, that's definitely, don't do that. That's the way not to bring up cognitive decline.
But we used to, that's a senior moment. I mean, before, I guess we've learned all this, not that we know everything obviously yet about Alzheimer's, but we've kind of figured it out. At least it's a thing. I mean, for years, they're just senile. They're, old grandma. Were they experiencing Alzheimer's too, or could have been, when we're like, she's just crazy. She's 110 years old.
We absolutely believe that for a long time there's been a significant number of underdiagnosed cases, and truly right now there's still we're still underdiagnosing this disease, specifically in younger people. People younger than 60 have something called, if they have younger onset or early onset, they may be getting diagnosed with schizophrenia. They may be getting diagnosed with, different types of psychotic illnesses.
Right.
When truly it is a dementia.
Well, and that was my next question. I'm glad you brought that up, because we talked about, going into this show today, we talked about over half of people, have Alzheimer's if they're 85 years or older. I guess the question is, how young? I mean, you think of it as an old man or old woman's disease. It's granny. Can it happen a lot younger? Can it happen at 35, at 25, at whatever?
Absolutely. There have been some dementias that have been, they've been caused by stroke or traumatic brain injury that have been as young as 17, 18 years old. Wow. But if we're talking about like truly the Alzheimer's dementia or the prefrontal cortex dementia, those that are not created by traumatic brain trauma, I've seen people as young as 32 be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. There have been people who have been in their early 40s who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Right. Those are individuals who have their whole lives ahead of them. A lot of times they will be diagnosed with young children. They'll still have kids in elementary school and middle school. And it's heartbreaking to witness someone have so much of their life taken away. Younger onset seems to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of how fast it progresses as well. And
probably there isn't, I suppose, but what is the timeline from diagnosis to the decline, to the ultimate, to the end, and is dying, from Alzheimer's? Is it different in everybody, or can you say, you're diagnosed, you're at this point, you've got, when we have diseases, you've got 2 months to live. We have that. Is there a way to predict that with Alzheimer's?
Well, I love that every time I start doing interviews like this, I sound like I know what I'm talking about. Full disclosure, am not a scientist. I have a business degree from USC. Right. But, there is something called comorbidity, which means that typically those who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, 80% of them are going to have some sort of other issue, be it heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, all things that need significant management through medication and through care. If you have dementia, you can't remember to take your medicines on time. If you have dementia, you may miss doctor's appointments, specifically if it hasn't been disclosed to you that you have it.
Right.
So when we talk about that, sometimes dementia can cause worse symptoms of other comorbidity things that will increase the inflammation, will cause more issues in terms of medication, mismedication. Those types of instances can lead to an earlier death. Okay, but then at the same time, we've known people who've lived 15 years with Alzheimer's specifically those who had younger onset. I can tell you right now, my grandmother's been diagnosed for 4 years. We believe she's had it for 6, and she's healthy as a horse, even though she's broken 2 legs in the last year and had to have surgery. Every time the doctor goes, well, she's going under anesthesia. She's not 27 anymore. And she comes bouncing out and I'm like, I can't even handle anesthesia like you do. You're 88 years old. She's very healthy physically.
Right.
So we can't give you a range of what this looks like. What we can say is there are things that are exacerbated by this disease. So you have to be aware, and I think you have to be prepared for anything, specifically as a caregiver, because you're going to watch declines happen. Again, you talked about your pop. Mm-hmm. It was a long goodbye, 10 years, and they're slowly eroding away.
And that's, I guess, the reason I asked that, because I remember when he first was diagnosed, and we talked about it, and he stayed in his house by himself for several years. But the last 5 or 6, he was in an assisted living home in Rutland, Vermont. But yeah, I mean, he was there, and we had a full diagnosis at that point. But yeah, it was a long journey. So is it the actual Alzheimer's that is fatal, or are there other things that are happening? Is it a fall? Is it my step grandmother, my stepfather's mother had Alzheimer's, and we watched her, and I was a kid, and we watched her road very much the same way. She ended up dying because she choked on an apple. Is what killed. She choked to death.
So that's a great question, and I think it's something that people have to really examine, right? The first is comorbidity. Yes, that can be a factor, but yes, you can live to the point where Alzheimer's affects your brain so much. Your brain shrinks on Alzheimer's. When they did autopsies on patients who had this type of dementia, the mass that the brain had was actually significantly smaller, and I can't remember the percentage that it shrank, but I want to say it was somewhere around 20%.
Wow.
Shrinkage of your brain. That's significant. So what does it affect? What bodily functions does it affect? Chewing and swallowing, choking, being able to walk, being able to move around, being able to talk. All right. Well, the 2 that are the biggest are falls, because we know that it's not just a broken hip. People can fall and break their necks.
Sure.
The second one is the swallowing situation, chewing and swallowing, but it becomes even worse later in life, where swallowing becomes asphyxiation, and it'll become pneumonia. So when someone dies from Alzheimer's, if they've lived out the duration of the disease, there's typically a situation where all of the body systems start to fail. Maybe started by aspiration, leading to pneumonia. So, while Alzheimer's is not like cancer, it doesn't choke something out, like, your heart or anything like that, it does create such a problem for your body to function, because your brain is no longer big enough to control all of the functions like breathing and swallowing.
Right. And all the stuff that we just don't even think about. We just do.
Right. And so that's really and I think that's why it's so important for end-of-life care to be considered. And we talked a little bit earlier about how an early diagnosis can make all the difference for a family. Mm-hmm. The reason that I say that is financial planning, legal planning, and emotional planning all need to be considered. And you need to be able to talk to the person who has dementia while they can still tell you what their wishes are.
Okay.
So having that advanced care planning conversation, long-term care. Do you want to be in an assisted living facility, or do you want to be in a nursing home? Do you want us to keep you at home and bring people in? Do you want hospice? Do you want a feeding tube? All of those questions need to be answered while that person is still capable of telling you, because you really, in a stressful situation like end of life, don't want to be making that call on your own.
Right.
So that's why early diagnosis can really make the biggest difference.
Talking with Taylor Wilson, the Alzheimer's Association here in South Carolina. Statewide walks happening over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So very important to at least educate yourself. Alzheimer's clearly touches everybody, and by the numbers, and it's very frightening to think that it is going to, if it hasn't yet, somehow you haven't been touched by it, it's coming. It's coming. But also, with any luck, what also is coming is that first survivor, and that's going to be that aha moment to reverse or stop. And that's the aha moment I think we're all looking for when it comes to Alzheimer's, is not that you have it. That's here's what we can do to reverse, to stop it, to prevent it. Taylor, listen, it's alz.org/SC, as in South Carolina, the Alzheimer's Association. Taylor, thank you so much. I know you work very hard between here in South Carolina, but also you do a lot in the nation's capital on behalf of the state of South Carolina and for all the people who are affected, impacted by Alzheimer's. So we appreciate what you do as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys.
This has been Carolina Cares, an iHeartMedia production. My name is Tyler Ryan, your host. If you have an idea or some a topic you'd like to hear discussed, please drop me an email, tylerryan@iheartmedia.com. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk with you in 7 days.